for a while, been out of the program for a while, and I think can offer some reflections on building a career in planning and starting out. So I'm just going to introduce them very briefly and let them go into more detail about themselves. But right next to me I have Matt Holland, who is the planning manager in the Watershed Protection Department. Then I have Nadia Berenidas, who is a project manager at Capital Metro. And then John Michael Cortez, who is a special assistant to Mayor Adler, who works on a whole bunch of different topics. So I think what I'm going to do to start out, we have kind of I sent them questions that were sort of curated from the questions the students had sent. And I guess I want to start out sort of big picture and move down and ask you each, well, first I'll ask you each to introduce yourself a little bit more fully. So tell us what it is you do now, and maybe very briefly.
Okay, so once again, I'm Matt Holland. So I've been working on it, I got out of the CRP program a long time ago, late, about 1990, and got a job with the city at the time as an intern and then a tip, and that'll kind of segue into some of the other good questions that you guys had. I went into the private sector for about 14 years as a planner, an environmental planner, and then I returned in 2005 to the city of Austin, where I've worked since at the Watershed Protection Department. So basically been in planning. I've been sort of a pseudo engineer part of the time, helping engineers with technical modeling and so forth. So I have a little crossover there, and I think
serving as a translator.
Serving as a actually literally sometimes. And so that's been a pretty key role for me, along with the more pure planning duty. So I ended up working with Watershed Protection. We have a departmental plan, like a lot of departments, like the water department has a water plan, and the parks department has a long-range park plan, et cetera. And we have a Watershed Protection master plan. And so our group helps with that planning and direction for the whole department. And we also help facilitate our $35 million a year capital program, where we build a lot of drainage solutions and water quality solutions. And then we help a ton with policy kinds of questions like land development code ordinances and criteria and so forth. So there's a huge array of issues that we touch. It's a very interesting job. There's a lot of interesting elements to it, and I'll talk more in a little while about hiring and all that kind of stuff, because we do actually interact quite a bit with CRP.
You can see him on Channel 6 quite a lot.
Yeah, right. All too often. Usually getting grilled.
Yes,
So I'm Nadia, and I actually started at my planning profession or my studies at the University of Arizona in Tucson with Dr. Rosenblum. And actually, I'm originally from Austin. Actually, John, Michael, and I go back as teenagers. We're high school.
Nice.
So I'm from Pflugerville, and he's from Round Rock?
North Austin.
North Austin. Anyway, so my family's here, and went away to Tucson and decided that planning is a very community-based profession, and that I really wanted to live and work in Austin. So I actually transferred back to UT and graduated from the CRP program, and at that time I got an internship working at the city. And so when I went to apply for jobs, they already kind of knew me, and so I was able to kind of get my dream job, which was a bicycle and pedestrian planner. So I got to do, for about 9 years, I was building bicycle facilities and sidewalks and trails. I ended up running the trail program for a couple of years, and then I kind of wanted to try something new, and had gotten my project management certification. And actually, John Michael helped me get a job at Cap Metro, because he worked at Cap Metro at the time. And I've been there for the past 3.5 years, and really focusing on, well, first it was building capital projects for Capital Metro. So I built everything from bus stops to trails to parking lots, things that just needed to get built. But also I became very interested in Cap Metro's relationship with the city of Austin. They have this working group called the Transit Priority Working Group, and it meets bi-monthly, and we were able to kind of move the needle on a lot of things transit related that hadn't been done before. So until recently, until maybe a year or so ago, the city never had anybody in their transportation department that specialized in transit. So she was hired, and I worked, she's my direct liaison, so we're able to get really big projects done a lot more efficiently because of that relationship. So if you guys have seen the contraflow bus lane on Guadalupe or the red bus lanes, that's all stuff that I get to work on, and it's been really exciting. So.
It has immeasurably improved my life.
Good.
Daily number 20 rider. Awesome. So I'm John Michael Cortez. I currently serve as the special assistant to our mayor here, Steve Adler, where I advise him on transportation, land use, policy, planning, some other areas like workforce development, also some economic development, and I handle a lot for the office, a lot of the intergovernmental relations with other jurisdictions around Central Texas, and when the crazies are in state legislative session, I try to help on that as well. So, you know, the mayor's office is a pretty small office, so pretty much you have your fingerprints on everything, too much stuff. Now becoming a public health expert, not really, but I have relearned how to wash my hands. So speaking of, I'm also, I really enjoy pizza, so please save me a few slices because it smells great. It's very spicy. So I got to where I am. It certainly wasn't anything intentional. It wasn't an intentional path. I kind of fell into it. It's kind of an odd journey. I grew up here, graduated from the Macomb School of Business for undergrad, and like most of my colleagues, my peers, you know, you graduate from there, you go straight into corporate consulting, which I did with a little firm here, and then wanted to start a business. Didn't really care what it was. So somebody had the idea of starting an import-export business for structural steel, construction steel, and then we got into contracts. So I was in the construction business. I had a construction company for about 4 or 5 years and hated it. Was not really interested in it at all. So I found myself volunteering a lot in the community to do stuff. And one of my friends got himself elected to the city council and asked if I would serve on the Zoning and Planning Commission for the city of Austin. And didn't know anything about zoning, didn't know anything about subdivisions and the land development code or anything like that. But I said, sure. So I sat through these Tuesday meetings and learned a lot. And that's when I first learned to hate zoning. What I discovered is that I really hated zoning, but this planning thing was really interesting to me. So I went to my friend on the city council and said, you know, I don't want to be on this anymore, will you put me on the planning commission? And so I got on the planning commission and really started to enjoy it and to learn about planning, read a bunch of books, and I said, this is really cool, this is actually what I want to do, this business thing that, or consulting is, this is the kind of stuff I really wanted to do, and I really got interested in transit. Having grown up here and used the bus most of my life, I said that, you know, I really want to help make transit happen. And at the time, I was winding down my business, and I went to Cap Metro. I said, hey, I would love to come help. I don't know anything about transit, but I would love to come help somehow. And you know, I thought it was crazy. He said no. So I left. I shut down my business, and then I went to work for one of our local congressmen here, and for a couple of years doing work here in the office. And then finally, Cap Metro called and says, okay, now we figured out that we could use your help, and I started working at Capital Metro. In a different, it wasn't real, a different area of planning. I ran their community engagement work to help inform the transit planning and policies, and built that up for about, I was there for 8 years. And then I got a phone call from our newly elected mayor and asked for him to, he asked for me to come help him as his chief of staff, and I said no. And then I changed my mind 2 days later, and I was the chief of staff for a couple of years, and then that was terrible. And said, I really want to refocus my time and energy on making sure that we get transformative transit investment, and then help get the land development code down. So as I was telling Dr. Mueller, almost done with both of them. I'm going to be real bored here in a little while. So that's how I got here. It wasn't intentional. It wasn't anything I planned. It just kind of fell into it.
So I thought that was nice. You talked about the zoning and planning commission and the planning commission. So all three of us have done that at some point or another. It's a great way to kind of jump in to the local community scene if you're, especially if you're in the private sector or you're in the non-public sector. But yeah, so
I think there's some vacancies actually.
Yeah,
So
right.
I'm on
So
the
that-
zoning and planning commission. I think there's a vacancy now.
There you go, if anyone wants to apply. So yeah, so Nadia is on the zoning and planning commission right now as we speak, and then John Michael and I served together on the planning commission. It was a lot of fun and a real learning experience.
It was.
So anyway, there's a lot of ways to kind of jump in besides just the actual job path.
Yeah, well, let's continue on this, because one of the issues that students wanted to hear about was how you think about building your career, what are the kind of pros and cons of starting out with the city and just staying with that one employer and kind of moving, or it sounds like, some of you did work in the private sector and then moved back and maybe worked in different parts of the city, volunteered. What do you think are the different ways that you can get the skills you need to kind of move up to do the things that you really want to do?
It's a great question. So I started out at CRP. I was very focused on environmental planning even while I was in CRP. I studied under Kent Butler long ago. And the classes I took there in your program were incredibly relevant to what I ended up doing. So I literally took things that I was doing for my class assignments and kept doing those things when I got my job as an intern and later as a temporary when I first started working for the city as a young whippersnapper right out of the grad school program. So, I honestly, I think I've always been very public sector minded. I'm very interested in community and very interested in service of the community. So that was a great fit for me. I ended up getting kind of lured into the private sector at the time. I was just, I was a young person. I didn't have benefits. I was thinking, hey, somebody offered me a pretty good job working for a local, larger civil engineering company. So I got lured away and worked with them for a couple of years for this large company. And then I was kind of kept having my eye back on the city position. I really enjoyed it. I love the community, the people that I work with, my work family. And then I ended up working. Then I got one of the fellows that I worked with at that company asked me to work with him at a new spin-off small engineering company he created. So I started working for those guys and worked there about 6 years. And that was a really good experience. And I was actually working with my old city friends on projects, but on the private sector side, and learned some new things. And I got a little broader experience on types of projects than I would have had I just stayed at the city in terms of like the topics. But again, I was still kind of pining back for that. And then I worked for an even smaller company. It was only like one person essentially, it was a bookkeeper or something. In the private sector for another 6 years. Again, working mostly on public projects, most of them for the city of Austin, but a lot of them, but other ones too. I got some really interesting, good experience that way. Some national exposure actually. And really enjoyed that, and that was actually the time when my wife and I had our son, and it turned out to be a really great fit because I had a lot of flexibility in that particular position, and just really enjoyed that. It was a great period of my life. And then a position came opening finally at a managerial level, doing environmental planning at my old work, the watershed protection department. And so somebody had said, hey, you should apply for this job. Check it out. You might really enjoy it. You might get the job. So anyway, I applied back in 2005. Ended up getting the job and returning back to my old roots. So I feel like I've had a journey where I've just done almost, I've done private sector at 3 different scales, very tiny, medium, and very large. And actually liked elements of all of those. I think the medium and small was best fit for me. But I think a lot of people thrive. I have a lot of friends that were in those larger companies that still work for those folks. There's a lot of job opportunities in the private sector. It tends to pay a little better than the public sector. But the work is a little bit different animal. And then with the public sector job, you really could, get a job right out of school with the city of Austin or with another community like that and just keep on going right through your career. That's a little less often. And, you hear about the average person changes jobs X times, and it's not 1 or 2, 6 or 8 or whatever. I don't know the stats, but anyway, I enjoyed having that different experience. Some of my friends are now retiring that I came in with. I haven't had, since I went away for a long time, I don't have as many years racked up at the city, so I'm not sure, when exactly I'll pull the trigger on retirement, but anyway, all those things are things to think about as you go in, like what type of work do you like. Anyway, I'm a big public sector person. Like these guys ended up gravitating toward that role.
But it sounds like, since you did work in all those private firms, now you may contract with them, or you work with them.
Yeah, and I understand.
And you know more about kind of
how to interact with them, and there's a lot of, kind of wonky things. I mean, we didn't learn in CRP how do you write a scope for a project. How do you work with a consultant and figure out, okay, I want this thing to be done. How do you actually write out how that works? And so I think some of your projects probably lead up to understanding how a project works and so forth. But that was a big advantage coming back for all that experience. Because when I was working for that final small tiny company, I was basically getting all of my work myself. So my boss was a really great person, but she was kind of doing her own thing, and I was doing mostly my own thing. And I would just go out and work with people and get on teams and get on projects that way. So that was a great experience, and I learned how to scope out things, understand, how do you carry through a project and complete it, ideally in budget. Otherwise, you're just working for free, which I did some. But anyway, it was a lot of, I don't know, I really feel like I've been pretty blessed. I came in at a time when there was a lot of interest in environmental planning in the city of Austin. There still is. But it was a very supportive environment. So anyway, proud to be here.
So I think, the general work cycle, when you get a job, you're super excited about it, and then maybe a couple or so years in, you kind of go, I'm doing the same thing, and I'm bored, and I want to try something else, and but then I get a new assignment. So I think there's like a cyclical flow of any type of work, and you may, like Matt, meet a friend or make a friend that says, hey, you should apply for this job that's over here doing, I'm currently in the public sector, but I tried the private sector. And I think you make, as a person, you might make these little decisions along the way that changes your trajectory, and I think you should take the opportunity to try something new all the time if it sounds good. And I know a lot of times it doesn't, for the job that I got at Cat Metro, I wasn't exactly perfectly qualified for it, but I think I did a great job in that position because it was something I was passionate about and I was willing to learn. So I think when you see something that you're interested in and you want to apply for it, learn as much about the position as you can, meet other people that are also doing that work, and see if you can tailor your resume as much as possible to the job posting. But I think you should always try something new and get that varied amount of experience that you can. There are a lot of people that, as Matt mentioned, that stay at the city for their entire career. And one of the things that they've done recently is they have this municipal civil service qualification that actually gives people in the city priority. So if you're applying for a different job within the city, because you're already a city employee, you have an it's like you get more points or something in your application because you're currently part of city employees. So they do try to encourage you to stay there. And even though the private sector, your salary might be more, the benefits of the city are incredible. They're one of the few agencies that still give you a great pension. So
Do y'all know what that word means, pension?
Yeah. So my long-term goal is to go back to the city because I bought in 11 years, and eventually I want to go back there and retire from the city because the pension is so great.
I know, like I'm thinking, what am I going to do next? Should I go somewhere else? And then they send you that statement at the end of the year with your pension. It's like, oh man.
Cat Metro also has a pension, so either way, but it's something to think about as you maybe grow a family or you're thinking about retirement, because the sooner you think about those things, the better. But as far as a varied amount of experience that you can gain from different types of work, I think Matt also mentioned this, that I worked for a private firm for a very small amount of time just while I was in graduate school, and just the idea of putting together an RFP and how you put together a proposal when you're seeking to get a job. I think those skills are very important. And when you're, on the other hand, when you're at the city and you're looking for those, to hire those different firms, you know what to look for when you're doing that. So I think both sides are really valuable.
I absolutely agree that, you know, as far as building your career, and I might be the worst person to ask this question since I've never really intentionally sought out a career, but I do think, you know, having observed people who are successful in this profession, I think especially for something like planning, because it is so broad and varied, that the more different types of experiences and areas that you can have some experiences in, the better one you'll be as a professional, and two, the more attractive it will be. So Matt, you know, is our go-to guy on environmental issues, on watershed and issues that, but he also, you know, but you know, right now we're working on the land development code. These are issues that directly impact things like housing, you know, things like urban design, you know,
Urban trails.
Urban trails,
Yeah.
parks, you know, how we do parks. And so in this field, you're gonna, everything intersects. And I think that's why planning, the profession and the education is so valuable, is because you learn about the interconnected nature of all of these things. You can't just be focused on this one thing and disregard its impacts on everything else, right? You have to think that way. And actually, you know, something that I've been saying for years, we need, you know, as somebody who has been an elected policymaker, who knows lots of policymakers and works with them all the time, we need more planners to actually be the ones making policy, because their brains actually think, well, I can do this over here, and that's good, but it's going to negatively impact these three things over here. You don't see that a lot with people who make those big, weighty policy decisions. So I think it's a great training. But as far as building your career, definitely try as many different things as you can, because it will benefit not only your employer, but it will benefit you. And I think for me, as somebody who hasn't ever really been a technical person, you know, I'm not the person working on GIS. I'm not the one who's, you know, analyzing a watershed. You know, I've been more on the engagement and the policy side of things. And in one area that's really often overlooked is actual implementation. You know, there are a lot of good planners. You know, there's not as many good implementers, and so I've really tried to focus on implementation. I always make sure in our office that we have at least one CRP student who's in the office as a fellow or an intern. And one of the things I always tell them is try everything, because there's not only the different fields, whether it's transportation or the environment or housing, you know, there's all these arenas that where planning is necessary. But I think there's also different roles within the planning profession, almost like a spectrum. As I mentioned, I'm not the technical person, but there's some people that are really good technical people. Right? We've always got some GIS nerd in the office, right? You know, and they're great. You know, I've tended to focus on the policy side and implementation, but for a while I was on the engagement, and that, you know, actually putting together and doing community engagement programs. It is very rewarding work, and no matter what planning you're doing, that's an important piece of it, and that's an area you can focus on. So I tell the student, pick what kind of planner you want to be. But try it all, because it'll all be useful. Because you're going to need to. You do community engagement. You actually do community engagement. I may not be on the technical side, but I have to talk to technical people to figure out what the right policy is. So you're going to need to touch all of it, but it's almost like find what really moves you. You know, for me, for a long time, it was the engagement. Now it's more the policy and implementation side. And so and I think
I'm
all
still
about
figuring it out, honestly.
Still
Figuring it out.
Well, all three of us sort of saw opportunities as we went along, and you meet people who help guide you, and that's just kind of a constant, and it's something to keep your eyes open for. Like the first opportunities are often less, you know, you've got narrower vision because you haven't seen the 868 things you might be able to do. But anyway, you know, be patient with it. It's I almost always advise people to jump in and seek an internship or some kind of temporary employment at one of these things. Maybe you're not, maybe you end up going, I don't like this. I thought this was gonna be great, but you know, it didn't work out. That's fine. You're learning, you know, where you want to go, and you're gonna keep your eyes open and see these other people and what they're doing. I actually counted in our group, we have a work group of about 13 within our small planning division within watershed protection. And all but 2 of us, I think, started as interns, like I did. I mean, we just, you come in and you explore and see how it goes. And that's a great way to get exposure and to get, somebody to pay attention to how amazing you guys are. Because CRP is one of our go-to programs when we try to recruit for our open positions. So.
It also sounds like the CRP network, you guys kind of keep in touch, and that's part of how you learn about these different
Oh
opportunities.
yeah, this city is rotten with planners.
I love John Michael's comment about planning, and I use the analogy of like connective tissue with the planning groups. We work a lot with, we're watershed protection, so we're doing drainage and environmental work, but we work constantly with the transportation department, with the public works department, with the parks department, with the Austin Water Department, with our planning and zoning department, and others, development services, of course. Those almost all have planners themselves, and we end up working especially with them as planners. So it's, it's pretty social work. I mean, it's a pretty social job where you're interacting a lot and communicating a lot with other people. So, there's some kind of wonky, if you don't want to just be a data person, you can do that, but a lot of it has to do with interacting with other people and learning from them. And I found that that's one of the most rewarding parts of my work, is like John Michael was saying, I consider myself something of a drainage and environmental expert, but I also have had to learn about parks and what makes them tick and what some of their pain points are and how we can help with them and Austin Water and what they do and so forth and so on. So that's, as a generalist, which is what I am, I really enjoy that piece of it.
Okay, so another theme that came out of the questions that the students submitted was the issue of leadership and thinking about how you have an impact. Everybody comes to planning school, because they're passionate about some aspect of cities that they want to work on. So I think apart from kind of your substantive area, how do you think you go about building kind of the leadership skills you need or getting to the point where you can have that kind of position, and what advice would you have for people, early on? Like, how do you think about that and consciously build those?
Sure. Yeah, that's a great question. I think some of our earlier answers kind of speak to some of those opportunities. So when I was first at the city, I was at absolute lowest position possible. But I worked with all these different people and was kind of gravitated and was really interested in a lot of the policy calls they were making, and because they were working actually directly with the city council, which is a really interesting environment. So those are the literal leaders of the community as the city council. And so it kind of trickles down into the staff. But I was always kind of keeping my eyes open to kind of how that worked and who was doing what. Later on, I gravitated toward getting onto the planning commission, and I actually worked as I volunteered in my neighborhood for a neighborhood planning process and became the vice chair and later the chair of our neighborhood planning team. Basically as a neighborhood leader working on city business and city issues. And then that led to the planning commission job, and then later I got hired onto the city, and I worked a lot with John Michael and the other city council aides and council members and mayor. But so those kind of leadership opportunities are things that you can kind of see and pick out and gravitate toward if you're interested. I can tell you that the CRP people we've hired have pretty uniformly been very motivated, intelligent, kind of folks, and with a lot of technical skills. And they've tended to be the types that want to jump up and volunteer for a project where they maybe get a little bit of a speaking role. And you guys are, I don't know how the classes are structured now, but you guys, I've tended to be pretty impressed with the kind of, public speaking, PowerPoint creation, et cetera, skill set you guys have coming out of the program. And so those are important, and a lot of it's within the position. You have a lot of, you probably have more control than you think about how, if there's a project you're working on and you want to take more of a leadership role in that project, even though you're not a manager or you're not some kind of big wheel starting out, there's lots of ways you can kind of be motivated and telegraph or directly say your interest, you give your interest in playing more of a leadership role on a project, and that, I think that does lead to really good things down the road, in being a leader.
I think when I read this question, I kind of got stumped, but I think more than anything else, joining an organization, as Matt mentioned, joining his neighborhood planning contact team, but Women in Transportation Seminar has, regular meetings, or our Central Texas APA group. We don't meet often enough, so I feel like if there were strong student involvement and wanted to have, some kind of sessions, or I think there's a real need for that, and anybody could stand up and do that work. But I think, getting involved in some kind of organization that'll allow you to build that leadership skill, I think is.
Absolutely. Well, there's different kinds of leaders, right? I mean, there's lots of different ways to lead, but if what we're talking about is how to make an impact, first you have to want it, right? Which I presume everybody in this room does. Like raise your hand if you decided to be a planner because you wanted to get rich. Right? So I didn't see a lot of hands. So obviously, you care and you're passionate. That's the fundamental thing. And then it's how you do it. And a lot of that plays to what are your skills, your abilities, and your interests. But there's lots of different ways to lead. I think, though, that the common element among most different types of leadership is the ability to communicate. Because leadership is about bringing people with you, and it's really hard to do that if you're not a strong communicator. And I'm not talking about being able to stand up in a room and give a speech. That's one way to do it. I mean, the best leaders I've ever seen are leading with a small group around the table, and how you not only communicate, just people forget communication is two ways, right? I mean, most of it is listening, and not just listening, but hearing, understanding, sympathizing, empathizing, and then communicating back. That is really the fundamental, in my mind, the fundamental trait of all different kinds of leaders. But, kind of what Nadia and Matt said, honestly, most of leadership, in all the different ways I've seen it, are the people who show up regularly and who assert themselves. That's about all you need to do.
And be dependable.
And be dependable. I first got into community service and leadership when I was an undergrad. I was finishing up and I was really, didn't have enough to do. So I just started, I said, I was probably where you are now, thinking about what am I going to do, where am I going to go work after this. And so I said, well, I'll go volunteer at an organization. I said, well, I was in business school, so I went to the Chamber of Commerce. So I signed up to volunteer at a committee. And I'm the only one who showed up to all the meetings. And the first rule of leadership, if you show up to all the meetings, eventually they make you the chair. Because they know you're going to be there. And honestly, so much of life and so much of it is just showing up regularly and doing what you say you're going to do, right? And the best leaders are the ones who do what they say they're going to do, and then they do more than that. And they do more than they're asked. So if you get asked at work, hey, will you do this, and then you do more than that, and you assert yourself and take the initiative, I guarantee you that's about all you have to do, and you will be widely viewed and seen as a leader in whatever you're doing, whether it's an organization or professionally. And there's so many ways, about making an impact. As Nadia said, you're going to find yourself in these cycles where you're working on something that just ignites your passion. The flame is just coming out of your ears, and you don't have to be motivated. You're going to work your 60, 80 hours a week to do it. But you will hit a point where it's drudgery. It's like, oh, I hate this. This is no good. This is boring. We all want to be fulfilled and make an impact through our work, but sometimes you're just not going to be able to. Find a way to do it outside of work, right? Because find a way to satiate that desire to make an impact, whether it's being on a board or a commission or volunteering at a church or in your neighborhood or wherever. You have to fill that need, and if it's not going to happen during the 8 to 10 hours a week, day that you're working, you can find another avenue to do it. But fortunately, you will find those times that we've all found, and we're fortunate that we do get to do that occasionally. Sometimes, some of us even regularly through our work, and it is great.
As city employees, are you allowed to be on boards and commissions at the same time, or?
So,
I'm not a city employee.
So actually, I had a city attorney drag me off the stage. I remember this. It was my last day of being a planning commissioner, because I just got my job, or announced that I was about to get my job as watershed protection person. And so I was going to be involved in some development-related, work. And so they said,
Get
you
out.
need to sit in the audience, you were no longer on the dais. So the answer was no when it's directly related, but I think there's a very real possibility that you could be.
But he could be on the Arts Commission.
I could be on the Arts Commission, exactly. That's exactly where I was going with it. So yeah. So if it's some kind of conflict, or you had some good ethics questions in here, and I've actually found myself on the edge of a lot of those things where I'm super interested. I have a lot of really kind of personal, private opinions about how things work. But as a city employee, you have an important role as a member of a team, and so you can't just be out there freelancing or signing up for random boards and commissions that have a direct relationship to your work. So, yeah.
And Nadia is the mayor's appointee on the zoning and planning commission in that service.
Nice.
Yeah. I don't think I.
I wonder who put my name in there.
Right. Yeah, right. Sure.
Gotta help sister out.
Yeah.
That's a good segue to questions about ethics. So, how do you deal with it if your personal feelings or politics or principles come up against something that you have to do? How do you go about figuring out when you're going to decide on these things?
Yeah, superb question, very difficult sometimes. I think as I journeyed through my career path, I found ways to find things that were most aligned with my values and my own personal perspective. So I think if you find yourself in a job that's just like perpendicular to what you want to be doing with your life and have a lot of ethical conflicts as a result, that's obviously a red flag, or at least a yellow flag. But I have had times where I'm just not as motivated. I'm a pretty outspoken person within our work group and within our teams, and I have a lot of vigorous arguments behind the scenes again about policy, about direction of the department, that sort of thing. But in the end, I want to come across as a team player. Certainly, and it's extremely important in a public setting to not be the person that's just like I don't know, in the city context. So, but I think I feel like we've had some in this organization. I've had some latitude in being able to express myself and be able to feel like I can make important good decisions. I haven't had a situation where I've been asked to do something unethical, or I think that's where it's going. I don't know how fortunate that is. I don't know if that's a real usual situation. Actually, one of my past bosses used to work for the private sector, and she was talking about this, working for this development company that was just pretty cutthroat, and they were trying to just get projects in and have be fast and easy and cheap. And so she was trying to do some slope mapping, and you have to figure out how steep is the slope, and if it passes a certain threshold, then you can't develop as intensively. And so she remembers a point where her boss was like, well, just move the contour line and make it work so that this kind of thing. It's like, that's not,
Just get a Sharpie.
Yeah, right. Let's get a Sharpie. Yeah, right. A lot of things can happen if you get a Sharpie. So she ended up, stepping away from that job. It was one of several incidents like that. But I mean, there are jobs where you're probably going to feel uncomfortable with the stance of the work or the what have you. I find our work extremely gratifying that I'm working on, say the land development code that we're working on currently with the city of Austin. It's actually an extremely difficult job. It's actually very draining and very sort of emotionally exhausting sometimes because there's so many opinions on how to get things done. But I found that that's actually a really rewarding place too. So a lot of it's just going to depend on your personal interests and your so forth. But anyway, I think as I was going from chair of the planning team to planning commission to city staff, and actually I was very active in my own neighborhood association, and so I was trying to advocate for some transportation solutions for our particular neighborhood because we just had a crazy cut through traffic up in the Ridgetop neighborhood where I used to live, and so as a city staffer I was actually going to council members and talking to them about how do we work on this transportation issue. It didn't have anything to do with my watershed work, but I actually didn't realize it. It was back in the Sandra Crichton days, but I got crossways with the public works director at the time, who was like, "Hey, what's this city staff are doing? Advocating with city council." And it was pretty small time looking back at it, but I mean, it was a little bit of a pain point for me. And so, anyway, my bosses were pretty cool about it and said, "Look, we understand what you're doing, and we don't think there's a conflict here." But it was one of those starting to get into a gray area about what's appropriate. A lot of it's going to depend on your management structure and what they feel comfortable with. So being communicative on that and not just sneaking around and doing it or whatever is really pretty helpful. So anyway, that's my fun experience with that.
I think I've only had one ethical, and it wasn't necessarily ethical, I think it was a disagreement with my supervisor as to how we should sign a particular project, how we should have traffic control devices, or it was about sharrows, which we don't really use those anymore, but shared lane markings with arrows and a bike guy, and an east side neighborhood, and the community member that we were working with was absolutely against it. He thought it was the wrong treatment for the roadway. He called my boss. We had to have a field meeting to talk about it, and we ended up taking him off the road because he didn't want them there, and he was a community leader, and we were kind of just listening to their feedback. So it was experimental at the time, so it wasn't approved. We were doing an experiment, so I think that was an easy out. But it was a disagreement that I had with her internally, and when we met in the field, we were all on the same page, and it was kind of one of those things where there was a political rationale for it, and I don't know if I were the supervisor, if I would have made the same decision or not. It just kind of depends on the relationship you have. But I think that was the only time where I really felt a conflict. But beyond that, I mean, if you have a good working group and there are some issues that you don't agree on, usually you have a whiteboard session, and you do a bunch of drawings, and you make a chart and do the pros and cons, and you come up with something that everyone can agree on. You have consensus, and you walk out of that meeting with some good ideas. So we had one of those this morning about floating bus stops. Do they make sense? Are they going to stop traffic? Do we care about traffic? Do we care more about safety and reliability of the buses? Yes, we care about that, and so the people that are behind the buses are going to have to wait. So that's the kind of decision that
I make a pretty sharp distinction between ethics and principles and beliefs and values, etc. So, and this is an incredibly privileged thing for me to say, that if I'm ever asked to do something in the work setting that's contrary to what I believe is ethically right, I'll just quit. Because I have been asked to do something, not in my public service, but when I was in the corporate world. And my experience, and I suspect it's the way that this happens, is it's never a one-time thing. If you get asked to do something unethical, it won't be the last time you're asked to do something unethical. So, for me, it's trust your gut. If it doesn't seem ethical or right, you should walk away, because it'll continue to happen. And it's amazing, and you can, you read about ghastly things that have happened in history. It's people becoming comfortable with doing things that were contrary to their ethics and their values. They just got used to that feeling, with that gut reaction you get when you go, this isn't right, but I'm going to do it. Maybe it's just this one time, and then the second time it gets a little easier, and the third time it gets a little easier, and then where do you find yourself after that? So again, again, it's a privileged thing to say, because you have a job, you got a mortgage, you got a family, but if you ever find yourself in that position and you have the ability to walk away, I would walk away. That would be my advice. Now, that's different. That's different than values and beliefs and things that you want to see happen. This happens to me every day. I agree with my boss on almost everything. But it's those few. It's about the how, or how much, right? So, and this is something I think you're probably going to have to get yourself comfortable with, and it gets easier over time, and that's humility and pragmatism and keeping your eye on what's really important in the long run. So, again, you're here in this program because you believe in something, and there's something that you would like to fix or to change, or outcomes you'd like to see, and you should never lose that. But there's gonna be some turns along the way, and you're gonna have to make some compromises along the way. Things are not gonna always be as pure or as ideal as you'd like them. sometimes, you know, you're gonna have to paint a Sharrow instead of build a cycle track, you know, because, but you know you're making progress. You know, in my experience, and I call myself one of those rare progressives that actually wants to make progress, you know, that I'm gonna have to make compromises and sacrifice some things in the effort to actually take a step forward. Because sometimes if you push for that really 2 or 3 steps forward, you find yourself in a situation where you have to take 4 steps back. So you're going to have to be pragmatic. You're not always going to get to the idea, but as long as you can live with the fact and recognize that you are making progress towards that goal. You know, Nadia and I grew up here, and you know, we're transit people, right? Or you're just mainly a bike person, but we're transit bike people. I mean, can you imagine what this place was like to use transit 30 years ago, 20 years ago, or to try to ride a bike 20 years ago? And it hasn't been, Nadia got here and she fixed it, everything. It's been a series of small, painful battles, and I know, and it's the same thing on transit. I know, you know, there has been times where we knew what the right answer was, but we couldn't build the will to make that happen. So how far can we get, right? How far can we get? So you know, so that's different. Again, ethics, no compromises, but actually your values and the things that you're in this field to do, you're going to have to make some compromises. You're going to have to start getting comfortable with it.
Yeah, very well said. Actually, the ethics bit, I think, you know, even you know, John Michael was saying that this is kind of an entitled thing to say, but I think if you make the choice and leave, you will be rewarded. I feel like people I know that have made those choices and said, I just can't do this, someone else will pick you up and say, that's the kind of value that I'm looking for. So I don't think you should be scared to leave if you feel like you can't, there's something you can compromise on. And also with compromising, I think the story I told about, you know, the East Side Sharrows, I feel like at the time, my supervisor knew something that I didn't know, right? She had some sort of political insight or some background information, and I think as a, you know, young planner, I wanted it to be perfect. And she knew about, you know, if we compromise here, later on, in a couple of years, we'll be able to build this other thing that's much better. So I think that was a lesson for me. Just like you said, like John Michael said, little by little, we made progress, and you just have to take one little step at a time.
We couldn't have had a red contraflow lane on Guadalupe 5 years ago. That wasn't going to happen.
Yes.
Yeah, but it took us, well, let's try these shared transit priority lanes. Well, you can't take any lanes. We'll just take the parking spaces. Let's try, you know,
right.
So, but people get used to it. You take half a step. Gosh, we should have fully dedicated lanes on Guadalupe. But we'll get there. But we have to take those compromise to get there.
Okay, so I'm going to shift to something a little more pragmatic. So a lot of people here are preparing to look for their first job after graduation, and are interested in hearing your thoughts on when you're hiring new employees, are there particular skills or training that they get in CRP that you're looking for, or are there other kinds of traits or values that you look for when hiring? And also, what do you think in the coming years are going to be those skills that are going to be most important?
Okay, so we've had an incredible success hiring CRP graduates in our program, our board group. We've had a number. We've hired a number, both for full-time permanent employees with full benefits and quite a few temporary workers. Some of whom have actually, as I described earlier, a lot of our temps then become permanent employees with us. And so these are themes that are going to keep repeating. We're looking for communicators, and that's the main thing you're doing as a planner. Is we're trying to figure out how to. You know, John Michael nailed it when he was talking about, like, I'm translating for engineers who are not notoriously inept at communicating. And so, even as they're brilliant at trying to do something technical. So, we're looking for somebody that can communicate really well. So, writing skills are really key. Speaking and presentation skills, whether or not you're doing that directly initially or you're just helping somebody, you know, set that up, those are crucial. Our particular group is pretty technical, and so we do a lot of spreadsheet modeling, and we do a lot of, and actually I learned spreadsheets through Sandy's class, doing demographic modeling, which I just completely fell in love with. I'm a total Excel geek. But that was you don't realize how life-changing that class was. Just like the basic 1A class. But anyway, that was really fun. But anyway, we do a lot of spreadsheet work, and we actually intersect that a lot with GIS. And so we do a lot of exports of the data sets from GIS and put it into Excel and do all kinds of wizardry to do analysis, to do presentations, to make conclusions that directly affect policy. So I'm looking for somebody that's got kind of that, mainly that broad set of traits. Your environmental classes, or your water classes, the great green infrastructure classes, that kind of stuff. Very big, that's a big plus. If somebody has a few classes that are directly related to our work, that's really helpful. Anyway, those are the kind of main ones for us.
So I echo communication. I think as we communicate with the public about how bus services are changing or why we're investing in bus services, I think being able to do that graphically as much as possible is really valuable because people don't read. So having some kind of skills in graphical, visual demonstration, visual communication, I think is really key. And you can do that with maps too. And I, personally, so this position that I'm in, I've only been in a little over a year, and a lot of what we do is before and after analysis. So after we've implemented this project, does it work, right? So the bus actually pings the server every 10 seconds. So I have millions of points of data that need to be analyzed, and so I'm learning. I didn't use pivot charts as much as I ever in my life, as much as I have in the last year, and so learning how to analyze all this data, I think, is a really valuable skill. And then once you have that data, how do you communicate that at a third grade level to somebody? So the standard deviation, what does that mean? How does a more reliable transit schedule, or how does that, why is that important to you, customer writer? And so even like the length of a project and making it easy to understand, the scope of what you're doing graphically, I think is a really key skill.
Well, I'm sure glad there's people like you who like this stuff.
I mean, I've had to learn.
I put my head through a computer screen.
I also want to say this, and I said this the last time I did this event, was if you're going to interview, be there early, you need to be the nicest dressed person in the interview panel, say thank you afterwards. These are just really simple things that may put you head and shoulders above anybody else that comes. So I think those are just, I've sat on a ton of interview panels, and the guy that gets there 10 minutes early, I'm like, oh, he's early, every time. So that's a really easy thing you can do.
Yeah.
I've had the fortune and misfortune of having to hire lots of people in various capacities, but not lately though. Thank God. But what I've always looked for, no matter what it was, whether it was in the corporate world, the construction industry, or in Capital Metro, or whatever, and this is going to sound really weird, but it's something I believe in. I look for people who have been in the customer service. Like I know a lot, I'd have to read a lot of application resumes, and then bring somebody in to look good, and then ask you, well, is this all you've done? I said, well, I also worked at Starbucks, I waited tables. It's like, I want to see that, because I know, having grown up in the restaurant business, is that if you're waiting tables or bartending, you have to learn how to deal with every single kind of person in the world. Great people, jerks. And you have to do it, and you have to smile. So like somebody who's who puts down, they were in the customer service industry for 5 years. I know they have the ability to endure lots of jerks, and sometimes. So, but it really is something. There's people. When you're in so much of work now is not individual work. You're working on teams. So much of our work is external. When I was in Capital Metro, it was all externals. We were doing community engagement, but I still had to work with the planners and the engineers and the finance people. So, there is a lot of translation, but it's also just all these interpersonal dynamics and how you work with people and being able to do that in a manner without destroying relationships. Pardon me. So I actually look for that. Maybe not everybody does, but that's something that I really value, because it also speaks to communication. And I absolutely want to see a writing sample, and I want to know that you know how to write, because it is increasingly a lost art. Being able to communicate something with brevity and clarity, and it's something that there's far too short supply. Other things that I look for, I've always looked for some sort of evidence that there is some desire for leadership. You know, I am the kind of person where I am a terrible manager, and actually I do not want to manage people anymore. And which is part of the problem with public service, because you know, this is another thing you have to think about in your career. You know, do you want to be an expert or do you want to be a manager? Because it's very rare that you find somebody who can do both. And what I tend to see at large organizations that are really sharp, good people, the way they reward them is they promote them into management. And that's because you lose your experts, you know, because then they have to spend their time being managers. So in any case, I've always looked for people who did something outside of work, who led in some form or fashion, because what that tells me is that I don't have to motivate that person. I don't have to be looking over that person's shoulder, because they're natural leaders. They're going to find their role and they're going to just do it on their own. Because I'm, you know, again, I'm a terrible manager, so I don't want to have to be motivating somebody every day. I look for leaders.
That is such a key thing, and that comes up. We have a pretty pressurized work group in terms of our workload, and we're constantly scrambling to keep up with what's happening. And so if I've got somebody, and again, the two latest CRP people we hired full-time into our group are very much like that. They're looking at a project, they're looking at the thing they're doing, and they're not just kind of going, okay, what do I do next, and waiting until that happens, until I can give them instructions, because frequently I don't have time to actually lay out every step along the way. And if somebody is self-motivated and shows a lot of initiative, that is incredibly helpful. And I think you're so find ways to, you know, look at this problem. And I think you guys are doing that over and over again with your class projects. You're doing critiques of that. You're trying to figure out like what are the different, you know, options here. I like it when somebody says, you know what, Matt, you were thinking we needed to do this, but actually I kind of looked at this from another angle and came up with an alternative approach. What do you think? I mean, my heart swells every time I see somebody do that, because it's not, you know, I wish I had more time to kind of just do all that myself, but that's not the role of a manager. A manager is sort of like, you know, getting everybody going in the right direction, and if you pick the right people and they're self-motivated, they show initiative, you know, incredible things can happen. So I think showing that kind of initiative and being that person that's a self-starter is a giant thing. I thank you for bringing that up. That's should have been one of the main things I mentioned. But, yeah.
Anything about skills that you foresee being especially important?
John Michael mentioned the public engagement piece. Shout out to Tatum Tratt, who really helped our team in a past internship, talking directly about public engagement. We're shifting into a whole new realm. I was kind of a master of public, what is the other one? Outreach, where, you know, like, hey, here's a big meeting, everybody should show up. And so I actually got pretty good at that. And I got meetings that were so exciting and interesting that the meetings would get bigger and bigger, and people were interested in it. But it was usually the usual suspects. It was the technical experts. It was the people in town who already cared about that issue. And so I thought we did a pretty dang good job at that. I think we're transitioning into a whole new era where it's not just get the usual suspects into a big room, you know, and then check the box off. It's actually, how do you go out into the community, meet with them? How do you do other kinds of metrics that try to gauge what the community values and interests are, and so forth. So we are going to be literally looking for that skill set as we hire into our next couple of positions within our work group. So public engagement, I wouldn't have said that. I mean, I think that's almost always part of planning, but it was kind of the old school dot voting and all that kind of stuff. Still do that, but I mean, I think a lot of it's just shifting into a whole new kind of echelon. And I'm admitting that I myself am not quite, you know, I'm not up to the same speed as some of the younger folks who are learning this and coming in. We're going to be leaning on y'all to help us get there.
You know, just one thing that you guys mentioned, I kind of laugh about it, or joked about it, but it's I see it starting to become increasingly important across disciplines, and that is I don't even know what to say, but taking a bunch of data and figuring out what it means, the data analysis, whatever you call it, whether it's transportation or I'm sure watershed, but housing. We have all these data sets, and we're trying to have or develop policies that are very, very metrics driven. We're modeling. Okay, well, if we adjust this, what is the outcome? In the real world. So I think more and more people who can, unlike me, do that kind of work without putting their head through a computer screen is probably a good thing to have almost across disciplines. I think that's there. I would also, I think, one thing that, I don't know if you'd call it a skill, but I think an area that I feel is becoming increasingly important is it's going to sound kind of weird, is history, right? So somebody who actually understands the history of a place, so that equity is becoming increasingly the real driving principle behind a lot of our policy making and our planning. Yeah. And you can't have a conversation about equity unless you know why the inequities are there in the first place. And that really requires you to understand a place. It requires good community engagement, because that's often how you learn how things got to be the way they are. But an appreciation and understanding of how the history of a place has actually shaped the outcomes that you see on the ground today, or the trends that you see on the ground today. For some people that's interesting, for some that's not. But I think it's something that's really, really important as we're thinking about, because a lot of planning is, and I'm going to way grossly oversimplifying, is figuring out what future you want, and then whether it's infrastructure or policy or programs, those are all just means to get you to the future you've decided you want. But you need to know increasingly, as part of that future you want, how you got to the present you have. And so I really appreciate people who know and appreciate and understand the history, whether it's of how we got to what our current transit network is. Some of us can tell that story. How we got to our inequities that we see in health or in housing. There's people who could tell that story. So and that's really important, and from my perspective as somebody who's trying to inform policy on what we ought to do for the future.
That's great.
So I'd like to open it up to questions from the audience.
If you could go back in time and give advice to your CRP self, what would that be?
This is more of a groaner, but I
Don't take out so many loans.
Yeah, I was one of those students who just immediately jumped in after my coursework and got a job, and then didn't finish my PR/. So I took 3 more years to finish that, because it was really hard, because I had these very engaging jobs, and I went, I'm tended to be really all in on what I'm doing, and having that extra thing on the side. So don't put off
Just
that
do it.
project. Yeah, and I actually had another version of that where I did this research assistantship with my professor advisor, Kip Butler at the time, and it was so aligned with what I ended up doing that the city was thinking, well, great, this Mount Ellen fellow did this nice job on this research, so we're going to hire him as an intern. So that was incredibly helpful. So right back into it. And so one of the first assignments they gave me was, hey, we want to do a phosphate detergent ban potentially here in Austin to kind of reduce the phosphate loads to our lake system. Can you do a research project on it? And I was very gung-ho. I was actually a past history major, so I loved doing that kind of thing. So I went wild over it. I still had access to all the online stuff at the time. So I did this kick-A job on this big project, and I had about a 40-page paper on, did all the research and stuff. And then I thought to myself, somebody said, well, maybe you should turn that into your PR. And I was like, no, that was just an assignment. I didn't have anything to do with, I needed to, figure out my own project or whatever. I remember looking back later, 3 years later, after I did all this data and research and stuff on this other really interesting project, but it just was kicking myself like, just finish the blanking thing, you get it in, because you're gonna learn a ton in your job, and so just do something fun and interesting, but keep it simple. So that was my big takeaway, is just, finding the ways to, keep focused as you're finishing up your program. I didn't have any big regrets on, wow, man, I wish I'd taken these courses and not these other ones. There's great options, and I know things have probably changed in terms of curriculum, but we had, I was very happy with with the selections that I had before me and was able to make and so forth. I think I ended up working with some of my colleagues because they went off to the city or they went to jobs that were similar to mine. I think I wish I had actually kept in better touch with that community, that class. I think it's a little easier nowadays with you guys. There's all kinds of ways to socially network now. But I think that was really valuable and rewarding to keep up with the folks at the time. But anyway, I don't have any major. I think there's just technical things like finish your project and getting it out there, because you're gonna find an amazing number of opportunities to expand your body of knowledge, and you don't have to hit a grand slam home run coming out of. I'm not looking for what was your PR, and how I'm not going to leaf through your PR to figure out if I want to hire you. I'm mainly looking like, what are you interested in, and so anyway, that's my thought.
So I did finish my PR on time, and my PR was about bicycle planning,
Sweet.
which is how I got my job. So I think if I wouldn't have done that work, then I wouldn't have known about bicycle planning, program implementation, all the best practices in bicycle planning. So I think I was lucky in that way. But I would say if I were to go back, I think I would be more involved with professional organizations. I think just that networking would have been good. I think now that I have a family and it's a little bit harder to do things at night, and I don't have a social life really, but I think when I was younger it would have been easier to do, and so maybe I would have done more of that.
I really enjoyed just about all of my experience here in the program. I did it a little differently. I was working at the time at Capital Metro, so I was taking as many courses as I could, and it took me quite a while to finish the coursework and then to finish the PR. There was a lot happening. I had my family while I was here, so I'm working full time, so it was tough. So I really didn't have the time. In retrospect, I think I gained a lot by continuing to work while I was here, but then I also think I lost a lot. I envied my fellow students who could spend more time in and around the program and be involved in things, but I also think I got a different experience too. But I do regret not having that opportunity where I could just be here full time. So that's good. I think I would have, because I was trying to actually get through pretty quickly, as quickly as I could, because I knew it was going to take me longer because of the way I was doing it. I wish I would have explored some other disciplines within the program. I wish I would have done more on. I didn't realize how much I really was interested in urban design, as much as I ended up being. And by the time I really figured that out, I was just about done. So there wasn't really much for me to do. So to explore within the program, you're going to figure out something that you are interested in that you didn't know you were interested in. So that would be my regret, is to take some other stuff.
When I was going through CRP at the time, and I remember you guys brought in planners from all kinds of disciplines to come in and just visit with us periodically in classes. And you also had to spend the day with a planner deal. And it was great currency back in the day for me, super young. Really, planners didn't change at all.
No.
30-year period. But anyway, those were incredibly valuable. So getting out and just kind of who the heck knows all the different options you're going to have, because there's so many different planning options, which is incredibly great, super high class problem. But you're going to want to figure out what are they. So this is kind of a little bit of a head start, but and don't be afraid to just call up and go, hey, Austin Transportation Department, hey, Austin Watershed, I would like to shadow one of your people for a day. You can do it on your own. You don't have to wait for the CRP program to make that happen or require it. So I would literally just start figuring, like, if you have a few thoughts on where you want to head, just impose yourself on that group. You go, you know what, I just want to be there, I'll help out, or,
People say yes.
yeah, and some people will say yes, and if they say no, well, no harm done, so, yeah. Cool.
Other questions?
Feel free to, it doesn't have to be career, right? If you have questions like, why the hell, or, what are we doing with the land development code, or
Right. How dare you,
This is kind of about Nadia's comment about kind of thinking that community is really important to doing the work you're doing. And I'm curious how kind of the knowledge that you gained by growing up and living in Austin helped you do.
well, Pflugerville.
I came to Austin all the time.
I'm not from Austin, I can't be part of this, of the litigation of whether it's not.
I'm sorry, what was the question?
How did that kind of lived experience, like knowledge of this place, like help inform your work?
Sure, so I think, a nod to what John Michael mentioned about the historic and the background of a lot of communities, but I think just spatially understanding how Austin works and how the neighborhoods function and knowing about neighborhood planning processes and also the cast of characters that, the people that live over here are kind of like this, or, I don't want to generalize, but I think just,
But you can, and it's fun.
well, to a certain extent, but I think just understanding that when you live in Northeast Austin, you have to sit in hours and hours of traffic to come downtown, and are there alternative ways to do that? Or, there's only 6 bridges that cross the river, and, I understand that people who live on the south side really struggle. So, I think just growing up here and seeing, we barely had MOPAC, and it was a really new thing. But, and then, also, I remember when SOS happened, that was a huge deal.
Does everyone know what SOS is?
It's an environmental ordinance that was passed in 1992 to protect the Bart Springs segment.
Save our springs.
Yeah, Edward's Aquifer.
Yeah, and all the advocates came to City Hall, and they were there until like 3 o'clock in the morning, and it was a huge, big deal when it happened. And I think I was, but anyway, that kind of stuff I think is valuable. And also my family's here, so it's nice to be near my family.
There was a time when I was on my neighborhood planning team, and there was this one guy that was a real irritant on the team that was, he was just a real naysayer. And as it came down to the very end, he basically told somebody at the city, hey, the city planner who is over this process moved into the neighborhood with, that is being studied here. And so that's a conflict or whatever. And I just remember thinking, and so first of all, I thought it was ridiculous. City's super risk averse, so they ended up pulling the guy off the project sort of, and then putting somebody else on right toward the end. It was actually heartbreaking. I like to see somebody who's super engaged in the community, that already knows what's going on, is very motivated. That's a big deal. Understand it. You don't necessarily. So I was born in Austin, but moved away, came back. You don't have to necessarily be from your. Maybe you guys move away and you have some other, Denver or Seattle or whatever for your work. You can still ramp up and learn all this stuff. You don't have to necessarily have been there the whole time. Definitely helps to have been there the whole time and to have kind of absorbed it. But anyway, I think that's an incredible skill set. Don't show up at the interview not having looked at the freaking website or whatever of that department or whatever you're doing. Do some research going in so you're up on it. Not just so you get the job, but actually build on that. And so anyway, great question. The more invested and the more deeply you understand the place you're working, it's just clearly a big benefit. Instead of just, we're not working with widgets here. We're working with communities that are incredibly, intricate. So that's good. That was a great one.
I don't know how people do it if they don't have that perspective. I think it's great. It's really cool because you have perspective on what a place used to be like and what it is today. Just for example, I think we were on the planning commission, right? When we were doing the site plan for Mueller.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
And I live there now. And it's really cool. And I flew out of there. When it was an airport.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, you know, that's just a really interesting perspective, you know, and that's the thing about planning, especially on the city planning end of it. You know, it is very, very rewarding, but I would suggest that probably one of the most important skills, and we kind of alluded to it earlier, you know, when we were talking about pragmatism, is patience, right? Is you are often not going to get that gratification from your work for 20 years, you know? So, you know, patience is another thing that you're probably going to want to develop. You know, it also, you know, just, when we're talking about like the land development code, you know, we have people come in and tell us, you're not doing enough, you're not doing this, you know, Austin has failed to say, hey man, I remember what downtown looked like 20 years ago.
Yeah.
It was vacant.
Nothing but
It was
warehouses.
Nothing. And look at it now, and there's 70 different towers
Yeah.
planned. I mean, you guys are nuts. So I remember what South Lamar used to be like. You know, I remember when Mueller was an airport. So they'll tell me that. And then people come. This is my favorite. People want to come and lecture me on gentrification. It's like, you know where my family lived? Bolden Heights. That's when they first got to Austin. You know, tell me about gentrification. We've been gentrified generations ago. You know, so you know, my mom, when she wasn't born here, but she lived here, went to high school here, and enrolled in the University of Texas. And she was 19 years old, a freshman on her own, because her parents lived in the valley at the time, pregnant, and with me, dropped out of college, right? And she's on her own, you know, I'm a WIC baby, all that. She has no money, nothing. You know, the only place she could afford to live in Austin, Travis Heights. So you know, to have that perspective, maybe you don't know what Travis Heights is. It's a very Tony neighborhood now. But you know, you have that perspective on a place. It really helps you put what people are telling you, put that into perspective when they try to tell you how awful things are or how terrible the decisions are made. So I have that perspective and they don't. So I think it's a kind of a secret weapon.
One last one.
And thanks for the good questions you guys contributed
Yeah,
to
great.
up front. It's pretty exhaustive.
And I'll just mention again, we try to always have somebody from CRP in our office, you know, as often as we can. We are trying to create more kind of fellowship programs. We've got one that we just started with the Women's Transportation Seminar. So we have a great person in that slot now, and then we have another CRP student who was a fellow through the CSD, right? And we wanted to keep them, so we found them another, you know, way to fund that. So when those opportunities come open, if you're interested, if you want to reach out, we'll probably try to have something next semester if you have any interest in that at all.
Do you also accept international students?
I'm sorry?
I mean,
Yes,
yeah.
absolutely, absolutely. We actually have a program that is really cool because they pay for it. Forgive me, this is probably the worst thing. I'm going to assume you're Asian, right? So we actually have something with APAPA, which is the Asian Pacific Islanders, something, I can't remember that. But they fund fellowships in our office. We always have a couple of APAPA people in the office. So be happy to connect you with those folks if you're interested.
Can you send me the information about that so we can share it? Okay, anybody else? Well, I'd like to.
Appreciate y'all's interest.
Yeah. Thank you so much for coming. Look forward to